Lakers get a big win over the Boston Celtics, the best the big three has looked. Plus, the Brooklyn Nets come back in the fourth quarter over the Dallas Mavericks. And then, real or fake, should CJ McCollum get traded? Should Myles Turner get traded? We're going to cover it all in today's episode of Locked On NBA. Let's go.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Locked On NBA, the daily podcast covering everything you want to know about the association. And on Wednesdays, I'm your co-host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and the host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And filling in for John today, we got Andy Kamenetsky covering the Lakers over at Locked On Lakers. You can follow him on Twitter at Cam Brothers. What's going on, my man?
How you doing? It's good to be here.
I know. I'm kind of enjoying that we get the opposite perspective from last night's game. Instead of John, who normally is the Locked On Celtics host, we got you coming in. So there's going to be a
winning
lot of Celtics
perspective,
slander.
Jake. The winning perspective.
Exactly. And look, that was a big game for the Lakers. So we'll talk about that coming up here in a second. Kevin Durant leading the Brooklyn Nets to a 17-point comeback. Before we get to all of that, though, today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by TrueBill. TrueBill is the new app that saves you money by helping you identify and stop paying for the subscriptions you don't want or need, and can even help you negotiate better deals on those you want to keep. And thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every single day. We're free and available 5 days a week on all platforms. No paywall, covering all of the games the night before. Not just cover the big stories, but keeping you up to date around the league. And look, big win for the Lakers last night over the Boston Celtics, 117-102. You and I were saying before we hit record on this was the best the big three has looked, and probably the best the Lakers have looked all season.
Yeah, it's not just, to me, Jake, the best that they've looked all season. This is the most they looked like an actual team. Like there have been times during the season, as up and down as the Lakers have been, where they've looked good over stretches, even looked good over a game. But this was the most where they looked like an actual team, where they understood what everyone else was going to be doing, what their actual assignments were, where they just seemed like they were actually on the same page with each other. Like that's something that has been missing a lot with this team, even when things are going well, much less over the course of an entire game.
Does that ease some of the heat maybe on Vogel a little bit on this? It seems like he was ready to kind of almost take the fall as a scapegoat. And one of the things I've seen from this team, and something I've said on the show, is I don't think the Lakers are necessarily title contenders this year, given how they've looked, but their ceiling for where they could be seems higher than what it is because, as you said, they haven't looked like a team, right? It looked like they needed to figure some things out. This was a game where all three of those guys play well. You get AD at the 5 a lot, right? And kind of use and deploy everyone properly. This is one of those games where you can kind of see what their ceiling is. And as much as like the Boston Celtics defense has not been good on this road trip that they're on, I mean, the Lakers did everything they absolutely wanted in this one.
Well, I mean, as far as the heat off Vogel, ask me after Thursday's game in Memphis, because, if they crap the bed in that one, we could be right back to the storyline all over again. But this does not hurt Frank Vogel in terms of however embattled that you think he actually is, with this organization. And, LeBron was asked about this on Tuesday, and he said good things about Frank Vogel without necessarily complimenting him highly as a coach specifically. And there are 1,000 different ways you can read into this, because LeBron is known for his passive aggressive cryptic messaging, particularly when it comes to coaches, most of which have seemed somewhat disposable over the course of his career. I have largely gotten the impression that LeBron, if nothing else, really respects Frank Vogel, respects, his preparation, his attention to details, which is stuff that LeBron cares about. But, these things sometimes can move in different directions. And, it's a different season now than it was then. This was just something that they needed, Jake. I mean, this was just really important for them. They obviously got to build on it, but you were talking about their ceiling as a team. To me, with the Lakers, they have, among all the contenders, the most to figure out, because by definition, when you have a completely revamped roster and drop Russell Westbrook in the middle of this. I say all the time, he's the least subtle player in the league. Like he's the least blendable player, out there in terms of just natural blending. But by definition, if they figure it out, it means it's going really well. Because I don't think you can sort of half figure this thing out. It's either really working or, it's working somewhere between fine and not at all.
Look, it was really working in last night's game. Russell Westbrook with 24 points, 11 assists. You had Anthony Davis, listening to maybe some of the criticism from Charles Barkley, 17 and 16 for him. And then LeBron with 35 and 4. It's exactly kind of what they needed. Look, they put up 66 points in the paint against this Celtics defense who average in the 40s. So they clearly were playing kind of the right style of ball. For the Celtics, by the way, you had Jayson Tatum have an excellent game, really played well against the Lakers, 34 points for him, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, but just no one stepped up. No Jaylen Brown in this one as he was out with a hamstring, but just not enough for everyone else. And now both teams are 13 and 12 on the season. You feeling a little bit better about the Lakers now after this one? Like how do you project the next 2 or 3 weeks going for them?
I mean, first of all, does everybody stay in the lineup? I mean, that part of what has been hurting this team, as much as you want to get into legitimate questions about fit and roster construction and the collective age, all of those things, which, are definitely worth asking. And I know I asked a lot of these questions in the offseason heading into the actual year. There were some moves that they made that I didn't quite, if not understand, I wasn't sure they're just the ones that I would have done. They've legitimately had no continuity whatsoever. There's 2 guys on the roster, Kendrick Nunn and Trevor Ariza, who were supposed to be rotation guys who literally have not played. So there's a lot that hasn't been figured out. And I don't know if you can figure it out unless everybody stays on the court. If they can go a 10-game stretch where they have this rotation intact, then I think you start really getting an idea of, okay, how are they actually progressing? How good can they really be? What are they building towards?
No, it's interesting. So the next, couple weeks, I think, are going to be really kind of key for them. And obviously, like with any team, staying healthy is really important. But for this Lakers team that's kind of really, really top heavy and doesn't have the depth, and doesn't have the pieces to trade for some of that depth too, right? Like that's going to be a big problem for them going forward.
Jake, they have 2 contracts of note that you could try to even turn into, like a legitimate 3rd or 4th option for this team. And one of them is Kendrick Nunn. He makes a little under $6 million. He has not played yet. The other one is Taylor Horton-Tucker, makes about $10 million a year. He has been, to put it kindly, all over the place. Those are your 2, not just best trade chips, they're your only 2. Because you're not likely trading the big 3, and the rest of the guys, everybody else, they're league minimum. So, I mean, they are kind of pot committed with what they're doing right now.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to watch. Also, by the way, does the rim owe Robert Williams money or anything? Because he was if you want highlights for the Celtics, that dude was flying feet above Anthony Davis at times in this game.
Time
Lord,
what,
3,
man.
Something like that. We went for.
Time Lord is a fun player, man. I have to imagine Celtics fans really enjoy watching that dude.
Yeah, he wanted, I don't know, he was going as far above the rim as you really could to try and score over Anthony Davis. Cut a couple of them, also got rejected on one, which was fun to see. So there you go. Lakers starting to turn around, big win over the Boston Celtics. So coming up, the Brooklyn Nets come back from 17 down against the Dallas Mavericks to win in the 4th quarter. And then the New York Knicks just flat out beat the San Antonio Spurs. We're going to be covering all here coming up next in today's episode of Locked On NBA. Before we get to that, though, today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by Calm. When it comes to athletes, we tend to focus on physical fitness, but there's another side to the game that's just as important: mental fitness. Calm, the #1 app for sleep and meditation, has teamed up with LeBron James to help you train your mind to become the championship version of yourself. LeBron and Calm know that your mind is like any other muscle in your body, but you don't have to be a world champion to learn how to train it. Calm can help you train your brain so you sleep better, reduce your stress, and perform at your best, just like LeBron James. And for LeBron, sleep is a critical part of his mental fitness routine. And he says, quote, "Getting a good night's sleep and finding time to rest is one of the most valuable things I can do for my body and mind. From the sound of rain falling on leaves to bedtime sleep stories, Calm puts me to sleep within minutes, which means I wake up ready for any challenge," unquote. So if you head to calm.com/lockedonnba, calm.com. For a limited time, you'll get 40% off a Calm premium subscription. With Calm, you have access to the nature scenes LeBron loves, like the rain on leaves, and so much more, like sleep stories and meditation, so you can be ready for any challenges that life throws your way. Again, for a limited time, our listeners can join LeBron in using Calm and get a 40% discount on a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/LockedOnNBA. Unlock content to help you focus, ease stress, and sleep better. Get started at calm.com/LockedOnNBA. That's calm.com/LockedOnNBA. Today's episode of Locked On NBA is also brought to you by Built Bar. Flat out the best tasting protein bar out there. So this holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or even better than a candy bar for certain ones. Built Bar, filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavor, covered in real chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, and high in protein. You get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. And they have so many flavors, you're going to have a tough time choosing. You're going to have the raspberry or the mint brownie, cherry or double chocolate. What about cookies and cream or peanut butter brownie? And they have limited time flavors over at built.com. I grabbed some of the ruby chocolate, which have just a hint of fruit and sweetness in these chocolate bars. And they are absolutely awesome, and everyone loves these things. I've had so many listeners come back to me saying they finally tried them. This is their go-to protein bar before or after a workout. I eat one of these things every single day for lunch. So if you need something to help get you through the holiday season, go to built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your next order. Again, that is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off over at built.com. All right. Thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every single day. We're free and available 5 days a week for y'all, breaking down everything you want to know around the league. And we got 2 more games up on a pretty light Tuesday night, but means we get to take a bit of a deeper dive. What about the Brooklyn Nets coming back from 17 down against the Dallas Mavericks? Final score of 102-99. This one was kind of interesting because it looked like the Nets were just uninterested in playing for a little bit. Then the fourth quarter happens, and Steve Nash leaves both Kevin Durant and James Harden in to start that quarter, plays them throughout the entirety of the quarter, all 12 minutes. They score a combined 17 points in the fourth quarter, and they managed to win the game. This is just one of those ones where Kevin Durant is a freaking cheat code at basketball.
You know what's funny to me, Jake, watching that game is how the Nets can go from looking incredibly stagnant offensively to looking lethal without really anything looking that much different in terms of what they're doing. It's just when Kevin Durant and James Harden start getting in that zone where they're making shots, there's nothing you can do about it. And you just need to take advantage of the periods where they aren't making shots. In the third quarter, Durant went, I believe, 1 for 8, but Luka didn't score. Luka had no field goals in the third quarter. Those are periods where you have to, if you're playing the Nets, try to bury them, especially a night where their defense for a while wasn't really quite able to keep up with Dallas. You have to absolutely capitalize it because those guys can just, once they start get going, they're impossible to stop, and they're demoralizing too.
No, you could see it get in the head of the Dallas Mavericks a little bit, I think, especially in the fourth quarter, right? They started to go really cold from the field, and you'd mentioned that Nets defense hadn't been great, and then they started kind of swarming at the start of the fourth and kind of kept it up through that period, and Dallas couldn't really get anything going. They really started to stagnate on offense, and they just started launching threes, and not great looks, right? They were 1 of 12 from 3 in the fourth quarter. They were 9 for 46. That's under 20%, 19.6% overall. Some of them were just kind of bricks and misses, but when the Nets really clamped down, they would not allow any dribble penetration into the lane whatsoever, forcing Dallas to shoot those outside shots. And Dallas at times cannot make a thing to save their life.
Well, I mean, think about that though. 46 threes, and you only make 9 of them. That's 36 possessions that come up empty. That is a lot over the course of a game. And I understand 46, while it's a lot, it's not necessarily unheard of. That's not something that that you would look at say in 1991 and be like, oh my God, what are you doing? What are you thinking?
Playing from space or something then.
Right, exactly. I mean, this can happen, but when you have, again, that many empty possessions against a team that as much as their offense didn't have it going, Brooklyn, for a lot of this game, have Kevin Durant and have James Harden, and those guys are always a threat at any point in a game. That's something that you have to look at afterwards and really start, evaluating what you're doing and what is your goal out there offensively as a team, and what Jason Kidd wants these guys to be doing as he's trying to put like a stamp on this team.
Yeah, right. Like you look at that fourth quarter and it's like, look, part of it, again, a lot of credit to the Nets defense during that, where they were just not allowing like anyone to do anything. But like Luka takes 5 shots in the fourth quarter. You're seeing this lead slip away from you in real time. It feels like you need to call a timeout, regroup, and be like, we can't shoot threes anymore. They're not falling. We've got to do something different. Again, part of it's the Nets defense. But you got to do something, because this was a night where it was like, oh yeah, let's totally not rely on the 3-point shot. And they kept shooting it and settling for those awful possessions. And this is where you see some of that coaching acumen from Jason Kidd, like, and the lack of it, right? Like, you need a coach that can draw up some plays and generate some forward momentum for you. And he was incapable of doing it in this one.
Or at least spill a soda. I mean, like, do something.
Do
something as
right?
a coach. Spill a drink, like something that will create momentum if you're Jason Kidd. And I mean, look, you talked about what he's going to be doing as a coach, man. Like, there is going to be a lot of scrutiny with Jason Kidd, because he is completely not just unproven as a head coach, he's really controversial as a head coach, because this is actually the story of Jason Kidd's career. As great as it was, he's, among the greatest point guards to ever play this game. It's always a messy exit. Always. As a player,
Always.
it was a messy exit. As a coach, it was a messy exit. He managed to napalm his way from Brooklyn to Milwaukee, and ended up napalming his way out of there too. I mean, this is just the way things happen with Kidd. I mean, it's interesting. The couple of years that he spent on Frank Vogel's staff, they were pretty uneventful, but everybody was waiting for him to be, doing a little finger and knifing Frank Vogel. I mean, like, that was the perception
when they hired him. Like, that was the story around it, right? Like,
yeah,
he's just going there for when they fire Vogel. Eventually, he gets promoted and becomes the head coach.
And the thing about Kidd too that I think really speaks to the importance of his game planning and stuff like that is he may wear out his welcome after a while, just because it's what he does. But he's somebody that players respect. Maybe after a while, those relationships start to fray. But in the beginning, he is somebody that commands a ton of respect from players. Like LeBron is a big reason Jason Kidd was on Frank Vogel's staff, or was basically going to be on anybody's staff that the Lakers hired when they fired Luke Walton and eventually brought in Kidd. And if you have the respect of LeBron like that, you've got the respect of everyone around the league. So they're going to follow you wherever you go. What are you telling them to do?
It's great. But look, Damian Lillard wanted him in Portland. Luka wanted him in Dallas. That's how he ended up there. It's just kind of like, it's almost like a cult of personality or something to a certain degree, but they absolutely love him. But he's got to coach better, and he did not do a good job in this game. 28 points, by the way, for Luka Doncic, 9 assists, but it could have been like 20 for him. Kevin Durant, 24 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. James Harden, 23 points, 12 assists, 9 rebounds in this one as the Brooklyn Nets get the win. And then the final game of the night, you've got the New York Knicks all over the San Antonio Spurs, 121-109. It was really the RJ Barrett show. 32 points from him. He was great in this one, 7 of 8 from 3. New York was just better. Their bench was really good in this one too. Mitchell Robinson with kind of a get-right game, 11 points, 14 rebounds. Derrick Rose with 12. Emmanuel Quickley, 16 off the bench. New York needed this one, I think, after 3 losses. Like, this feels like a bigger win than it should be over a not great San Antonio Spurs team.
Yeah, I mean, they needed it, New York, as a team. And you mentioned RJ Barrett. He needed it. 32 points in this game. The previous 3 combined, he had 32 points. He's really been underwhelming so far to begin this season. I know that there have been hopes within the organization that he was really taking steps, along with somebody like Julius Randle, in the right direction to really become like a cornerstone player for this team. And he's obviously talented, but like making the type of developments necessary to become, a second or third option on a legitimate playoff team, I think sometimes fans don't realize just how hard that is. Like there can sometimes be, and I think sometimes media too. There can be a dismissiveness towards a guy when they're thought of as like the third option or the fourth option for a playoff team. You're really good when you're that guy. Like that's really, really hard to be. Like, the Kobe Powell teams that I covered back in the day,
Mhm.
Lamar Odom was their third option. Lamar Odom was a luxury at that level. He was somebody that was thought of to be
Yeah.
talented enough that if he had really had the right mindset and right, approach to the game, could have been like a number one guy that you build around. And he really wasn't that guy for a variety of reasons. But if he's your number three, sometimes number four, depending on what Andrew Bynum was doing, that's incredible. Most guys around the league are nowhere close to being that good.
No, that's, I think, a really great point to make. For the San Antonio Spurs, by the way, Keldon Johnson left the game early. X-rays came back negative, though, so he'll be out for probably a couple games with a sprained ankle is what it looks like. So that was the night of action in the NBA. You didn't watch it all, but we did. That's why we're here for you on Locked On NBA. And coming up next, real or fake? I got a good one for you on Myles Turner and CJ McCollum as well. So that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On NBA. Before we get to that, though, today's episode of Locked On NBA brought to you by BetOnline.ag. BetOnline has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. As football season continues the march towards the playoffs, we got college bowl season, and there's NBA games every single night. So BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use our promo code Locked On. That's free money right there. It's like you've already won a bet. And all you did was sign up and make your first deposit. Again, promo code Locked On for a 50% welcome bonus. Whether it's basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all of the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every single day, covering everything going on around the association, recapping all the games the night before. But now we get to have a little bit of fun because we had a lot of news come out over the past couple of days. There's some chaos with the Portland Trailblazers. Yeah, that's putting it like lightly, I think, isn't it?
It's like you're going to have to be more specific, Jake.
Yeah, it's like this league is fun to cover because you just get some wild stuff. There's always drama, and like Portland, there's a ton of, and you have, I don't want to call it like a hit piece coming out from Woj on this one, but talking about, and this is his quote, right? That Damian Lillard and his next contract could be an albatross. And the quote is albatross around a team, which is kind of wild for me to think of. So real or fake?
I mean,
we try and do this every week.
If you don't want to say that's
time.
a hit, if you don't want to say it's a hit piece, Jake, that's fine. It's certainly not a puff piece.
No, it's like not, what a weird thing to say for like an all-time great player in like a small market who's been like shockingly loyal and is like an absolute fun player to watch.
Well, okay, here's what I will say about that. The wording of it is, like you said, pretty harsh, and it does feel, if nothing else, like you're hearing through Woj the perspective of some of the people in the building, vacillating about whether
like an ownership look,
right,
and stuff
or
like that.
Yeah, or or even, I don't want to speculate too much, but people that aren't with the organization around whatever, people can do the math from there. But the reality is, $51 million at 35, 55 at age 36. That is a really potentially dangerous contract on your books. And, what that starts becoming is, basically recognition of what Lillard meant to your organization. And you can justify doing that because I do think that having lifers, truly great lifers with your organization, that matters. And that's something that you can put tangible value on it. But you have to accept the fact that when he's 35, 36, unless you play your cards perfectly leading up to those seasons, you're likely going to have Damian Lillard landlocked into a bad team. It's the same thing the Lakers went through with Kobe post Achilles when they gave him that huge extension. It was recognition of what Kobe meant to the organization. And I understand that. And, in a lot of ways it makes sense, except it absolutely handcuffed the Lakers for those seasons with Kobe. And quite frankly, the rebuilding that they did, they fell ass backwards into it. I mean, they weren't even trying to get lottery picks. They were inexplicably trying to chase 8 seeds, and it, through no doing of their own, kept falling apart, and they got lucky that way. So it is something for the Blazers to think about. But that being said, with everything Lillard means to them, I would be careful about who you feed information to and how.
So, okay. So putting it this way, real or fake, you think it is an albatross of a contract or some sort of anchor of a contract, it sounds like, which I don't think is incorrect. Like, I think that's kind of like one of those albatrosses you'd almost like happily wear. Like, if I'm the Portland Trailblazers, to me, this is like a no-brainer. Like, I look at this team right now, right? And you're like, okay, you're going to be landlocked into kind of a bad team around Damian Lillard. It's kind of what they're already doing, right? Like, this is a team, even for the past like 4 or 5 years, right? Like, they were never going to win a title. There was no year that anyone was like, watch out for Portland this year, right? Like, they're going to go on a deep run and they're going to make the conference finals and they might get in. It was like, yeah, if 3 teams ahead of them have like bad injuries and it opens the door for them a little bit more, maybe they kind of fill through. But that's like every team, right? In the playoffs, if injuries kind of go your way, I don't know. This is one of those ones where, like, if you were to hire whoever your new like head basketball decision maker is, and the question is, okay, they're going into this job interview of, are you going to let me trade Lillard? And look, their ownership situation is also weird too, right? Like, Jody Allen's more of a caretaker than someone truly invested into this. If they sell, the money goes to a trust that probably does a whole lot of really great charitable work that she probably cares about more. It's a weird situation. I just really struggle, in my opinion. And maybe this is like the small market person in me here, right? Of like, you got to hold on to those guys and they'll sell out that building for like a 40-year-old Damian Lillard and everyone will love it there.
I mean, again, I watched this with Kobe. Kobe played for, arguably the biggest franchise in North American sports. I mean, it's like the Yankees, the Cowboys, the Lakers. And, they're not lacking for their ability to get stars. But having somebody like Kobe play 20 years with your organization, that matters. Same thing with Dallas and Dirk, San Antonio with Tim Duncan. I mean, there's like, even Miami with Udonis Haslem. Like, that matters.
Yeah,
that
is
is
a great one. That's a real good one.
Fans love. The Thunder with Nick Collison was something that fans genuinely enjoyed. Russell Westbrook had been setting himself up, I think, genuinely to be that guy for a while before things took turns. But it's maybe an albatross, but it's like a happy cartoon bird around your neck.
I like that. Yeah, happy cartoon bird hanging around your neck that inspires rhymes. There we go. I can use my English degree here for everything.
It's a goofy looking albatross.
Yeah, there you go. Like big googly eyes or something like that. All right. Shift into the Indiana Pacers, who comes out in The Athletic, are maybe willing to blow it up at least for this season, sitting at 10 and 16 and 13th in the Eastern Conference. They're willing to trade Karis LeVert and maybe one of Myles Turner and or Domantas Sabonis. So I'm going to put this question to you. Real or fake? Myles Turner is going to be the most impactful player traded at the deadline this season.
I'm going to say real. It feels like we have finally reached a place where the Pacers have come to recognize this pairing doesn't work. And if anything, we've held on to it for too long. I mean, I can't give you the reasons, like all of the particulars that it hasn't worked out. And it obviously hasn't been terrible either, but it's not leading them anywhere. And honestly, they would have been better off doing this a year or two ago and then building off whatever they did. But the value for either one of them isn't going to get any higher. And I think now that you don't have now that you have a new coach in place, and you don't it was blank. It's Carlisle now.
Carlisle, yeah. So like it makes no sense that you do this now after you've hired Carlisle and go with kind of the youth movement to me, but that's like neither here nor there.
You don't necessarily. But here's the thing, though. I was blanking for a second. My apologies on Carlisle where he landed because I kept thinking of him as the first time in Indiana. But you could trade Myles Turner for players who can help you now. Like Myles Turner
Yeah.
is good enough that he could help another team that's actually in contention. So there's, I think, a real opportunity to put yourself in the place after trading for Turner where you're still in contention. You just have a roster that fits better.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. That's kind of what the article really said, right? Like it said, they're not going to go through a prolonged rebuild. They can't really do that in Indiana, where they're, one of the worst teams in terms of attendance in the league. They just realize you have two good players that basically play the same position. You need to move one of them, get some decent players in return, maybe a pick or two, so that you can be active on the trade market later to go and get the other guy that actually is the complementary piece. Like they're going to plan on keeping Brogdon, it sounds like, and Karis LeVert is just, whatever, and has the injury history. But I do think that, Myles Turner can be the most impactful player traded this season, right? Like he's an impactful defender. I think if you looked at last season for the first quarter to a half, really before injuries kind of caught up to him, he was absolutely in the running for defensive player of the year. There's a lot of rim protection there with him. His 3-point shooting isn't amazing. I wouldn't call him a stretch big or a guy that's going to actively space the court, but he'll hit open threes when he's out there. That's
been good this
really
year.
Useful player. Yeah, right?
Right now, he's shooting almost 40% from three with the highest
on like 4.5 attempts per game, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's actually back to, a couple seasons ago when everybody first started thinking, all right, he might actually be a legit stretch five. So, I mean, again, this is the time to move him when he looks as good as he's going to be. He's shooting almost 53% overall, almost 40% from behind the arc, averaging almost 3 blocks per game, solid enough rebounding. This is the time to do it. Like if you don't do it now and you're also not willing to move Sabonis, then you really have to start questioning what they're doing over there. Or like if they're basically doing the same things Portland did with Neil O'Shea, who's obviously now no longer there, where they clearly hung on to the Lillard-McCollum pairing for too long when it was clear they had reached their ceiling. Like it's not even that they were bad, but they weren't going to get any better. Like you look at what Toronto did a few years ago with Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. Obviously that pairing was good, but it wasn't going to get any better. And you needed to make a change. As painful as that was for the Raptors, it paid off.
Yeah, and look, I think wherever Turner lands, and it sounds like they'll trade one of those two guys, like he's going to make a massive impact. And, I've seen some people kind of like, I've seen some of the talk around him where it's like, this dude's not good. He's not an analytics like Darling type of player, but he's an impactful player. I don't want to like make it sound like he's an all-star or anything like that, because he's not. But when you kind of look at the trade market this year, a lot of teams really seem like they want to be going for it. Maybe that kind of depresses the amount of sellers that are out there. And that kind of opens the door for Myles Turner to kind of be the crown jewel. And for a rim protecting center that can launch some threes, like you could do a whole lot worse upgrading your team with that guy for a playoff run.
Yeah, he's a guy that you could use to play big or play small because he can play all over the court and he's mobile. I mean, I know this. I mean, the team I cover doesn't have a real need for somebody like him. But if any team around the league that needs legitimate size, needs somebody that could be a starting five for them, I think they should seriously consider Turner.
Yeah, I'm entirely with you. So listeners, let us know. We're on YouTube as well, whether or not you think Myles Turner is going to be the most impactful player traded at the deadline. And that's going to do it for the Wednesday episode of Locked On NBA. So thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every single day. Andy, thanks for filling in for John today. This was
fun, man. I appreciate you having me.
Of course, happy to have you on, especially after a big Lakers win, to get that perspective. And as always, I'm your Wednesday co-host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and the host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Now for your second listen, go check out Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. They are on a streak right now. They're making me a whole bunch of money because I listen every single day.
Nice.
So go get your winnings over at the Locked On Bets podcast. That's going to do it for Locked On NBA. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back with you all next week.